It is 3:47 a.m. You are awake. You did not choose to be. Your eyes opened on their own. The room is dark. The clock on the nightstand says what it always says when this happens, some number between 3 and 4, and your first thought is that something is wrong with you, that your sleep is broken, that you will be exhausted tomorrow because you cannot do the one thing bodies are supposed to do at this hour. Notice where the tension arrived: in your jaw, in your chest, in the hand that reached for the phone. That tension is not from the waking. It is from the story you told yourself about the waking. Because the waking itself is not a malfunction. The waking is a program, a specific, timed, measurable biological event that your body has been running every night of your life and that human bodies have been running for at least 10,000 years, possibly much longer. The 4 a.m. waking is not insomnia. It is a scheduled part of the architecture of sleep. And the reason it feels like failure is that the modern world taught you to expect one continuous block of sleep from midnight to morning, a pattern your biology never agreed to in the first place. You just felt something shift reading that. The tightness in your chest eased slightly. Your shoulders dropped a quarter inch. That small physical response is your nervous system registering that maybe what is happening to you is not what you thought it was. Hold on to that shift. It matters because the same body that wakes you before dawn is the one that will carry you through tomorrow. And whether tomorrow goes well depends less on what your body is doing right now and more on what you believe it is doing. Let me take you to a library in Virginia in the early 1990s, because that is where the first piece of this puzzle was found. A historian named Roger Eckerch was researching something else entirely: the history of nighttime in pre-industrial England, when he noticed something strange in the documents. References to sleep kept appearing in pairs, letters mentioning first sleep and second sleep as if they were two separate things. Medical texts describing what people should do during the watch, the hour between them, court records of neighbors visiting each other in the middle of the night without anyone finding it unusual, diaries describing the dark hours between sleeps as the best time for thinking, for prayer, for quiet conversation with a spouse. Eckhart collected more than 500 references across multiple languages and 4 centuries. The pattern was unmistakable. Before artificial lighting, humans did not sleep in one block. They slept in two. A first sleep of roughly 4 hours, beginning around 9 or 10 p.m. A period of calm wakefulness, lasting 1 to 2 hours in the dark gap between. Then a second sleep of another 3 to 4 hours until dawn. This was not insomnia. It was not a disorder. It was the default pattern of human sleep for most of recorded history, and it disappeared only when gas lighting, and later electric lighting, extended the evening into hours our ancestors would have spent in darkness. When the evening got longer, the night got shorter, and the two sleeps collapsed into one. But the biology did not collapse with it. The body still remembers the older pattern, which means the pre-dawn waking you are having right now does not represent a failure of modern sleep. It is a ghost of ancestral sleep trying to run its ancient program on a nervous system that does not know the program was retired. Now, there is a second layer, because the waking itself is not random. Your body is executing a specific mechanism in those minutes, and it is not passive. To understand what, you have to understand what cortisol is doing inside you right now. Cortisol is the hormone most people associate with stress, but that association is misleading. Stress triggers cortisol release, but cortisol itself has many other jobs, and one of them is waking you up. Your cortisol level is not constant overnight. It follows a curve, the cortisol awakening response, and the curve has a specific shape. In the first half of your sleep, cortisol is low. Your body is in repair mode, parasympathetic dominant, deep sleep architecture intact. Around the halfway point, cortisol begins to rise. Slowly at first, then faster. By 3 a.m., it is climbing a slope that will not plateau until roughly 30 minutes after you wake for the day. This is not a dysfunction. This is the most robust and replicated finding in all of sleep endocrinology. Leproult and colleagues documented this mechanism across hundreds of subjects. Cortisol rises in the final third of sleep in every healthy human body. The rise has a purpose. It is preparing you to wake up. It is mobilizing glucose from liver stores so that your muscles and brain have fuel available the moment you open your eyes. It is warming your body temperature, which has been at its lowest point around 4 a.m., roughly 1 full degree cooler than your daytime average. It is transitioning your brain from the consolidation work of REM sleep toward the alertness you will need for the day, and it is doing all of this silently, without your awareness, exactly as it was designed to do. Consider what this implies. The rising hormone is not a symptom of dysfunction, it signals the opposite. A body that fails to produce the cortisol awakening response is a body in trouble. People with certain forms of depression show a flattened curve, their cortisol failing to rise properly, and the flattening correlates with the exhaustion they wake into every morning. The rise is health. The rise is the body doing its job. But here is where the interesting part begins. That rising cortisol can, in some bodies and on some nights, cross a threshold just high enough to wake you briefly and then not high enough to carry you into full wakefulness. You come to the surface. You open your eyes. The room is dark. And now your cortisol, which was simply doing its morning job, has been joined by a second wave because you looked at the clock and saw the number and your brain said the thing it always says. Oh no, not again. That thought is the second cortisol pulse. Psychological stress, layered on top of the biological rise that was always going to happen. It is the thought that keeps you awake, not the waking itself. The waking was the program. The stress was the interpretation. I want you to sit with the distinction for a moment, because it is the whole point. The waking is physiology, the suffering is narrative. And the narrative, once you understand what the physiology is doing, stops having power. There is a third layer, and this one is the most surprising. Consider what a sentinel does in a group of animals, in a troop of meerkats, in a herd of elephants, in any social species that sleeps in groups. Not everyone sleeps at the same time. Some members stay alert while others rest. They take shifts. The group survives because the watch is never completely abandoned. Anthropologist David Sampson studied sleep patterns in the Hadza, a hunter-gatherer community in Tanzania whose lifeways preserve ancient patterns that industrial societies have lost. He tracked the sleep of every adult in a Hadza camp over 20 nights. He found that, across the entire camp of 33 adults, there were only 18 minutes during all those nights when every single person was asleep at the same time. Somebody was always awake. The elderly woke earliest. The middle-aged woke in darkness. The young stayed up latest. The shifts were not coordinated. They emerged naturally from the varied chronotypes of the group. Sampson proposed what he called the Sentinel Hypothesis, that human sleep patterns evolved to produce exactly this kind of scattered watch, with different individuals waking at different points, so the group was never completely vulnerable. The people who woke at 3 a.m. were not broken, they were the watchers. Their role was to be conscious when most of the tribe was unconscious, to listen for predators, to tend the fire, to register changes in the environment. In a Hadza camp, if you are 55 and you wake before dawn, nobody thinks anything of it. You get up, you sit by the fire. Someone else might wake an hour later. The sentinel rotation continues. This is normal. This is how bodies in groups have always worked. And here is a detail from Sampson's research that is easy to miss. The Hadza who wake at odd hours do not report the waking as a problem. They do not call it insomnia. They do not wake afraid. They wake, they perform a small task or simply sit in the dark, and when tiredness returns, they sleep again. The subjective experience is as different from modern 4 a.m. waking as two physical events can be, even though the biology producing both is nearly identical. What changed is not the body. What changed is the meaning assigned to the waking and the social container around it. What modern life did was remove the tribe, remove the fire, remove the role, and then tell the pre-dawn waker that their biology, which is running the exact same program it ran in the savannah, is now a medical problem. I want to be careful here because the Sentinel Hypothesis is not settled science. It is a proposed evolutionary explanation, and like all evolutionary explanations, it rests on inference more than direct proof. What the data clearly supports is this: scattered waking within social groups is the historical norm, not the exception. What the data does not yet prove is why. Sampson's sentinel explanation is one possibility. Others exist. The viewer should know where this evidence sits. But what is settled is the deeper point. Human sleep, in its natural form, is not one continuous block. It never was. It is layered, interrupted, age-graded, and socially distributed. The 8-hour uninterrupted block that modern medicine treats as the standard was not the standard for most of human history. It is a very recent invention of industrial capitalism, and it is not what your body was built for. So what is actually happening at that pre-dawn hour? 3 processes are running simultaneously. The cortisol curve is climbing toward morning. The old biphasic sleep architecture is surfacing, producing a natural wake window between first and second sleep. And the Sentinel program, whatever its precise evolutionary function, is activating the watch role that older bodies seem more prone to fulfill. Three systems, one waking, and until modern medicine called it insomnia and told you to fix it, this is just what bodies did. Picture the layers for a moment. Imagine them as three lines rising at slightly different angles toward morning. The cortisol line, the biphasic wake window, the sentinel alertness. Where all three intersect, that is your early morning waking. That is the coordinate your body arrives at most nights through no fault or choice of its own. If you are over 50, these intersecting lines are likely stronger than they used to be. The cortisol rise becomes steeper with age. Deep sleep becomes shorter, which means lighter sleep dominates the second half of the night, which means arousals are easier. The sentinel role, if the hypothesis is correct, may activate more readily in older bodies because elders in ancestral groups were the watchers. None of this is decline, it is shift. The body is not failing to be young, it is becoming what older bodies have always been. Here is what to do with this, practically, because understanding without application is just philosophy. When you wake tonight, and you will probably wake tonight, because the program does not care whether you have read this or not, try the following. Do not look at the clock. Looking at the clock is the first action that turns the waking into stress. You do not need to know the time. It will arrive on its own when the light returns. Do not reach for the phone. The light will reset your melatonin. The content will activate your prefrontal cortex. You will turn a 20-minute wake window into a 90-minute stress spiral. Do not tell yourself you are an insomniac. Words create the frame. Frame creates the feeling. Feeling creates the second cortisol pulse. The label was never accurate. Do not adopt it. Instead, do the opposite of what anxiety wants you to do. Acknowledge that you are awake. Say, internally the watch is starting, whatever that means to you. For some people, it is literal, a mental image of tending an ancestral fire. For others, it is secular, a simple naming of the biological event. The words matter less than the reframe. You are not failing to sleep. You are briefly awake because your body is healthy enough to run the program it has always run. If you cannot return to sleep within 15 or 20 minutes, and you can estimate that without a clock by the drift of your own thoughts, get up. Do not stay in bed performing the effort of trying to sleep. The bed becomes associated with effort, and effort is the enemy of sleep. Go to another room. Keep the lights dim. Do something quiet. Reading, not scrolling. Sitting, not pacing. Stay in the ancestral version of the watch, which was contemplative, not frantic. Then return to bed when you feel drowsy. What will change, if you do this consistently, is not the waking. The waking will continue. That is the program. What will change is your relationship to it. In the first few nights, the old reflex will still fire. You will wake, you will reach for the clock before you remember not to. The stress thought will arrive before the reframe does. This is expected. Habits that are decades old do not retrain in 3 nights. By day 7 to 10, the pattern begins to shift. You will wake, and you will notice yourself noticing the waking, and the second cortisol pulse will be smaller because the interpretive layer is softer. You will fall back asleep faster because the stress cascade is not activating fully. By week 3, something more interesting happens. The waking itself may become shorter, not because you fought it, but because you stopped feeding it. The stress response was extending the wake window by 30, 45, sometimes 90 minutes. Remove the stress, and the window contracts to what the biology alone produces, which in most people is 10 to 25 minutes. Some people, at this point, discover something unexpected. The pre-dawn waking, once it stops being a problem, becomes something else, a pocket of quiet that did not exist during the daytime hours. A few minutes of thinking without interruption, a breath of consciousness between 2 sleeps that the ancestors called the watch and the poets called the blue hour. For some, it becomes the most peaceful window of the day. They did not reclaim it by making it stop. They reclaimed it by stopping the war against it. The research calibration matters here because some of what I have described is stronger evidence than others. The cortisol awakening response is as settled as any finding in physiology. The biphasic sleep history is thoroughly documented. The Sentinel Hypothesis is plausible but not proven. The specific practice of not looking at the clock is common clinical advice based on stimulus control principles that are well supported for insomnia treatment, though the direct trial evidence for this single component is mixed. The viewer should hold each piece at the weight it actually carries. What is not in dispute, at any level of the evidence, is this. The assumption that human sleep should be one continuous, unbroken block is cultural, not biological. The waking is not the failure. The story that the waking is a failure, that is the failure. Think about what this means for tonight. The body that will wake you before dawn is not a broken body. It is the same body that has kept your ancestors alive for thousands of generations by waking at that hour to listen, to watch, to tend, to simply be conscious when others were not. The program is ancient. The interpretation is new. And the interpretation, unlike the program, is something you can change. You will wake tonight. When you do, remember what you now know. The cortisol is rising because morning is coming. The biphasic window is opening because it has always opened. The Sentinel program is activating because your body still remembers a world in which somebody had to watch. You are the one awake in the house. You are the watcher. And this was never insomnia. The body was never broken. The story was. Lie back. Close your eyes. The watch is over when the program ends, and the program ends when it ends, not when you force it. Listen to the quiet. Notice your breath. The second sleep is coming.